The aroma of sizzling garlic and ginger filled the kitchen of Golden Dragon Restaurant as Maya wiped the sweat from her forehead, her tired eyes glancing at the clock that seemed to move slower with each passing minute. The evening rush had just begun, and she had already been on her feet for 12 hours straight. But Maya couldn't afford to show any signs of exhaustion. Not when every tip counted towards her mother's medical bills and her dream of attending the prestigious International Culinary Institute. As she balanced 3 plates of steaming dim sum on her arm, her fingers instinctively tapped against the serving tray, playing an invisible melody. It was a habit she couldn't shake, even after 2 years of putting her piano dreams in a box labeled "Someday." The regular customers had grown used to her quiet humming while she served their meals, some even requesting their favorite tunes when the restaurant wasn't too busy. "Table 7 needs more hot sauce," called out Mr. Wong, the restaurant owner, his voice barely carrying over the clatter of woks and the hiss of steam. Maya nodded, quickly delivering the dim sum before reaching for the bottle of sauce. As she moved between tables, her mind wandered to the grand piano that sat in her tiny apartment, covered with a sheet and gathering dust. It was the last gift from her father before he passed away, and selling it had never been an option, even during the toughest times. The lunch rush slowly transformed into early dinner service, and Maya's feet ached in her worn-out shoes. Still, she maintained her warm smile, greeting each customer as if they were guests in her own home. Between serving plates and clearing tables, she would steal glances at her phone, checking messages from the hospital where her mother was undergoing treatment. "You're humming again," teased Raj, her fellow server, as they both reached for water pitchers at the service station. "That fancy music school you attended really stuck with you, huh?" Maya smiled, remembering the 12 years she spent perfecting her craft, the countless recitals, and the scholarship she'd had to turn down when her mother first got sick. "Music isn't something you just forget," she replied, straightening her name tag. "It becomes part of who you are." The evening continued its usual rhythm until Mr. Wong called all the staff for a quick meeting. The restaurant had landed a huge catering deal, a private party for some big-shot tech millionaire. The extra hours would mean more money, and Maya was the first to volunteer for the event, even though it meant another double shift. As she went back to her tables, Maya's mind drifted to her morning visit with her mother at the hospital. Despite the tubes and machines, her mom had smiled and asked about her piano playing, worried that her daughter was letting her talent slip away. "Life has its own melody," her mother had said, squeezing her hand. "Sometimes we just need to listen carefully to hear it." Maya glanced at her hands as she carried a pot of jasmine tea to a waiting table. They were no longer the soft, manicured hands of a pianist, but showed the signs of hard work, small burns from hot plates, rough patches from constant washing, and a few calluses from carrying heavy trays. Yet, beneath the surface, her fingers still held the muscle memory of countless hours spent practicing Chopin, Beethoven, and Bach. The sound of breaking plates snapped Maya back to reality as a new trainee stumbled near the kitchen door. She rushed to help clean up, humming softly to herself, a habit that always seemed to calm not just her, but everyone around her. Little did she know that this simple act of combining her two worlds, the practical present and her musical past, was about to open a door she never expected at the upcoming private party that would change everything. The evening wound down, and as Maya counted her tips, she did the mental math she'd become so familiar with. Portion for mom's medicine, portion for rent, portion for the culinary school fund, and a tiny bit set aside for piano sheet music she still occasionally bought, keeping that small flame of hope alive. Tomorrow would bring another long day, another double shift, but Maya knew that every step, every served dish, every hummed melody was part of a larger symphony she was still composing. The afternoon sun streamed through the Golden Dragon's windows as Maya arranged tables for the upcoming private event. Her arms ached from moving furniture, but excitement bubbled beneath her exhaustion. The restaurant had never hosted such a high-profile gathering before, and Mr. Wong had been pacing nervously all morning, checking and rechecking every detail. "The napkins need to be perfectly crisp," he muttered, adjusting one slightly before moving to the next table. "Mr. Patel is paying top dollar for this party. Everything must be perfect." Maya nodded, understanding the pressure. Mr. Patel was a well-known tech entrepreneur whose success stories frequently appeared in business magazines. The kitchen buzzed with unusual energy as the chef prepared sample dishes for the evening's menu. The aroma of exotic spices filled the air, making Maya's stomach growl. She'd been too busy to eat anything since her morning toast. As she polished the last of the wine glasses, her phone buzzed with a message from the hospital. Her mother was having a good day, and the nurses had helped her video call Maya. These little moments of connection kept her going through the long hours. "Maya." Mr. Wong's voice carried a note of panic she'd never heard before. She hurried to his office, finding him hanging up his phone with shaking hands. "We have a big problem. Really big." The restaurant's regular pianist, Mr. Liu, had called in sick. Food poisoning from a different restaurant, ironically. Mr. Wong's face was pale with worry. Mr. Patel specifically requested live music. "He's bringing important guests, potential investors. What am I going to do? It's too late to find another professional pianist." Maya's heart began to race. She thought of her dust-covered piano at home, of the countless hours she'd spent practicing, of her mother's words about life's melody. Her fingers twitched involuntarily, muscle memory stirring from its long sleep. She started, then hesitated. The other servers had gathered near the office door, curious about the commotion. "I could play," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. The room fell silent. Raj, who had been arranging cutlery nearby, dropped a spoon with a clatter. Mr. Wong stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. "You? But you're a waitress." "I studied piano for 12 years, Maya explained, gaining confidence as she spoke. "I was offered a scholarship to the National Conservatory before." She trailed off, thinking of her mother's first hospital stay, the mounting bills, the hard choices she'd had to make. Mr. Wong's expression shifted from disbelief to desperate hope. "Show me," he said, gesturing to the baby grand piano that sat in the corner of the main dining room. More decoration than instrument most days. Maya walked to the piano, aware of all eyes on her. Her palms were sweaty as she lifted the cover, revealing the familiar black and white keys. Taking a deep breath, she began to play. The opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne filled the restaurant, her fingers finding their way home after their long absence. The kitchen staff peeked through the service window, and even the stern-faced chef emerged to listen. As the last notes faded, the room remained silent for a moment before erupting in applause. Mr. Wong's eyes were wide with amazement. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked, still stunned. "All this time." Maya shrugged, offering a small smile. "Nobody ever asked. Besides, I'm here to work, to earn money for my mother's treatment and my culinary school dreams. The piano. That's just a beautiful memory most days." Mr. Wong straightened his tie, decision made. "Well, tonight, it becomes more than a memory. Can you learn these songs by evening?" He handed her a list of requested pieces for the party. Maya scanned it. A mix of classical and contemporary pieces, nothing she hadn't played before. As the staff dispersed to continue their preparations, Maya heard whispers. Some were excited, others skeptical. "A waitress playing for Mr. Patel's party? This should be interesting," someone muttered with a laugh. But Maya didn't mind. For the first time in 2 years, she felt fully alive, her two worlds merging in an unexpected way. During her break, she practiced on the piano, her fingers remembering their old dance. Each note felt like stepping into a familiar room, dusty but unchanged. As evening approached and she changed into her serving uniform, Maya's stomach churned with nervous energy. Tonight could change everything. or it could be a complete disaster. Either way, she knew she had to try. Sometimes life's greatest opportunities come disguised as its biggest challenges, her mother always said. Tonight, Maya would discover just how true those words were. The private dining room of Golden Dragon Restaurant hummed with the voices of well-dressed guests as Maya peeked through the kitchen door. Crystal glasses clanked, designer dresses sparkled under the dim chandeliers, and the air was thick with expensive perfume. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she watched Mr. Patel greeting his guests, each one looking more important than the last. "Remember, straight to the piano," Mr. Wong whispered, adjusting his bow tie for the 100th time. "Don't let them see you serving tables first." But it was too late for that. Maya had already spent an hour helping set up the room, and several guests had watched her arrange place settings and fold napkins. Taking a deep breath, Maya smoothed down her simple black uniform. She tried to make it look more presentable by borrowing a small brooch from her mother's jewelry box, a tiny silver music note that seemed appropriate for the evening. Her hands were clean, but showed the slight redness from hot water and cleaning solutions that came with restaurant work. As she stepped into the room, conversations didn't just pause, they screeched to a halt. A woman in a red designer dress raised her perfectly shaped eyebrows so high they nearly touched her hairline. "Is this some kind of joke?" she stage whispered to her companion, loud enough for everyone to hear. Mr. Patel's wife, elegant in a silk sari, touched his arm with concern. "Darling, I thought you said we were having a professional pianist tonight." Her voice carried that particular tone of polite disappointment that cut deeper than outright criticism. Maya felt her cheeks burn as she walked past the tables, catching snippets of murmured comments. "The waitress. How quaint. Oh, this should be interesting." Someone actually snickered, the sound sharp as a knife in the suddenly quiet room. The baby grand piano stood in the corner, its polished surface reflecting the warm lighting. Maya had spent her afternoon break carefully tuning it, making sure every key would sing true. Now, as she approached it, the instrument seemed both a refuge and a judge of her worth. "Perhaps we should just use the sound system," suggested one of the guests, a man in an expensive suit who hadn't even bothered to lower his voice. "I'm sure the kitchen staff is very enthusiastic, but this is a business dinner, not a talent show." Maya's fingers trembled slightly as she pulled out the piano bench. She caught her reflection in the piano's glossy surface, a simple girl in a waitress uniform, daring to step into this world of wealth and privilege. For a moment, doubt crept in, whispering that she should walk away, return to her familiar role of serving drinks and clearing plates. Then she remembered her mother's face that morning during their video call, how her eyes had lit up when Maya mentioned playing again. She thought of the dusty piano at home, waiting patiently for her return. Most of all, she thought of all the times she'd stayed quiet, stepped aside, played it safe. A young man at a nearby table was actually recording with his phone, clearly expecting entertainment of a different kind. "This is going to be epic," he whispered to his friend with a smirk. "Social media gold." Maya closed her eyes for a moment, shutting out the judgmental stares and barely concealed smiles. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling the cool, smooth ivory beneath her fingertips. In that moment, she wasn't a waitress anymore. She wasn't the girl with the sick mother or the dropped dreams. She was just a musician, about to speak in the only language that had never failed her. The room held its breath, waiting for the inevitable disaster. Mr. Wong stood nervously by the kitchen door, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Mr. Patel checked his watch, perhaps already planning how to salvage the evening. But Maya didn't see any of that anymore. The keys beneath her fingers had become old friends, waiting to tell their story. And as she took one final breath, she knew that whatever happened next would change everything. For better or worse, this was her moment to shine. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne floated through the air like drops of rain on a quiet pond. Maya's fingers moved with gentle confidence, each key pressed deliberate and precise. The smirks on the guests' faces froze, then slowly melted away as the melody wrapped around the room like silk. She had chosen this piece carefully, not too showy, not too simple. The familiar warmth of the music filled her chest as muscle memory took over. Years of practice flowed through her hands, turning the simple restaurant piano into a vessel for something greater than herself. A waiter nearly dropped his tray, catching himself just in time. The woman in the red dress, who had been mid-sip of her champagne, lowered her glass slowly, her perfectly painted lips slightly parted in surprise. The young man with the phone kept recording, but his mocking smile had transformed into an expression of genuine amazement. As the piece built to its crescendo, Maya felt herself getting lost in the music, the way she used to during her recitals. The restaurant around her faded. The judging eyes, the designer clothes, even her own worn uniform seemed to disappear. There was only the music, flowing through her like a river finding its path to the sea. The final notes of the nocturne hung in the air for a moment before dissolving into complete silence. Not the awkward silence from before, but the kind that comes when people are afraid to breathe lest they break a spell. Maya opened her eyes, not realizing she had closed them, to find every face in the room turned toward her in astonishment. Without pausing, she transitioned smoothly into a contemporary piece. A popular song that had been requested, but arranged in her own classical style. She heard a few gasps of recognition as the familiar melody emerged from her classical interpretation. This was something she used to practice at home, blending her classical training with modern songs to create something unique. Mr. Patel, who had been checking his emails when she started playing, now sat with his phone forgotten in his hand, completely captivated. His wife had tears in her eyes, her earlier disdain replaced by genuine emotion. Even the kitchen staff had stopped their work, clustering at the door to listen. As the evening progressed, Maya wove together a tapestry of sound. Classical pieces flowing seamlessly into jazz standards, popular songs transformed by her classical touch, and back again. Her fingers danced across the keys with growing confidence, each piece better than the last as she remembered what it felt like to truly perform. The young man who had planned to mock her on social media was now live-streaming the performance with an entirely different caption. "You won't believe what just happened at this dinner party." His followers were growing by the minute as more people tuned in to watch the unexpected concert. Between pieces, Maya caught glimpses of the changing atmosphere in the room. The earlier tension had evaporated, replaced by genuine appreciation. Conversations had resumed, but now they were accompanied by her music rather than interrupted by it. She heard snippets of praise, saw heads nodding in time with the melody, noticed feet tapping under tables. An elderly gentleman at one of the front tables closed his eyes, a peaceful smile on his face. "My wife used to play this piece," he said softly to his companion. "I haven't heard it performed this beautifully since she passed." His words carried to Maya's ears, adding extra emotion to her playing. The woman in the red dress, who had been so quick to judge earlier, now sat with her chin resting on her hand, completely absorbed in the music. When she caught Maya's eye, she gave a small nod of acknowledgement, a silent apology for her earlier behavior. As she began the final piece of her planned program, Maya felt something shift inside her. The dusty dreams she had packed away were stirring to life again. Her mother had always told her that talent finds its way out, like water flowing through cracks in a dam. Tonight, those words proved true in ways she never expected. The last notes of her performance filled the room, strong and clear, before fading into another profound silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the applause began. Not polite, obligatory clapping, but genuine, enthusiastic appreciation. The sound filled the room, washing away every doubt, every snicker, every judgmental glance from earlier in the evening. As the applause finally died down, Maya felt both exhausted and energized. Her hands tingled from playing, and her heart was racing with a mixture of relief and joy. She stood up from the piano bench, giving a small bow as she'd been taught years ago, and was about to quietly slip back to her serving duties when Mr. Pottle raised his hand. "Please, wait," he called out, his voice carrying authority but also genuine warmth. The room fell quiet again as he stood up from his table. Maya froze, unsure whether she was about to be praised or scolded for disrupting his important business dinner. Mr. Patel walked over to the piano, his expression unreadable. Up close, she could see the subtle details of his expensive suit and the kind wrinkles around his eyes. That was, he paused, searching for the right words, absolutely extraordinary. But I have to ask, why are you serving tables when you can play like that? The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Maya felt all eyes on her again, but this time the stares held curiosity rather than judgment. She touched the small music note brooch on her uniform for courage. "Life doesn't always go as planned," she said softly, but her voice carried in the quiet room. "My mother got sick 2 years ago. The medical bills." She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "But I'm not ashamed of being a waitress. It's honest work, and it's helping me save for culinary school." Culinary school. Mr. Patel's wife joined them, her silk sari rustling softly as she moved. "You mean you have another talent besides music?" Maya smiled slightly, thinking of the dishes she created at home, experimenting with flavors just as she used to experiment with musical arrangements. "I love both music and cooking. They're not so different, really. Both are about creating something that moves people, that makes them feel something." The elderly gentleman who had mentioned his wife earlier came forward. "Young lady, I serve on the board of the City Symphony. We have a special performance coming up next month. Would you be interested?" Before Maya could respond, others began approaching. The woman in the red dress, who had been so dismissive earlier, now rushed to introduce herself as the owner of a popular jazz club. The young man with the phone announced that his live stream of her performance had already gone viral, with thousands of viewers asking about the mysterious pianist. Mr. Pottle listened to all this with a thoughtful expression. He motioned to Mr. Wong, who had been watching nervously from the sidelines. "How long has she worked here?" 2 years, Mr. Wong replied proudly, as if he personally discovered her talent. "Best employee I've ever had. Never misses a shift, always helps others. Customers love her. And you never knew she could play like this?" Mr. Wong shook his head, looking slightly ashamed. "She mentioned studying piano, but we never really asked more." Maya felt overwhelmed by the attention, but then her phone buzzed in her pocket, the hospital's evening update about her mother. Reality crashed back in, reminding her why she couldn't afford to dream too big. Mr. Patel noticed her expression change. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, it's just my mother's evening check-in from the hospital," Maya explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "I should actually get back to work. These tables won't clear themselves." But Mr. Patel gently touched her arm. "Please, sit with us for a moment. I'd like to hear more about your story." He gestured to an empty chair at his table. "About both your dreams, music, and cooking. Sometimes life has a way of bringing the right opportunities to those who deserve them." Looking at the sincerity in his eyes, Maya realized this wasn't just polite dinner conversation. Something had shifted in the room, in the way people looked at her, in the way she saw herself. As she sat down at the table where she had been serving just hours before, she felt the weight of all her buried dreams stirring to life, like seeds breaking through soil after a long winter. The private dining room had emptied except for a small group gathered around Mr. Patel's table. Maya sat with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, still trying to process everything that had happened in the last hour. The kitchen staff peeked in occasionally, giving her encouraging smiles as they cleared the other tables. "So let me understand this correctly," Mr. Patel said, leaning forward with genuine interest. "You've been working double shifts here while caring for your mother, and still managing to save for culinary school." His voice carried admiration rather than pity. Maya nodded, taking a small sip of tea to steady her nerves. Every little bit helps. The hospital bills are significant. But Mom's treatment is showing progress, and that's what matters. Mr. Patel's wife reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a business card. You mentioned culinary school. Which one were you hoping to attend? The International Culinary Institute, Maya replied, then quickly added, eventually. Right now, it's just a dream. She didn't mention that she had their brochure hidden in her bedside drawer, the pages worn from countless readings. Mr. Patel exchanged a meaningful look with his wife, then smiled. What if I told you I'm on the board of trustees at that very institute? Maya's teacup froze halfway to her mouth. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even Mr. Wong, who was pretending to arrange flowers nearby, stopped to listen. But that's not all, Mr. Patel continued, his eyes twinkling. I also happen to own several restaurants in the city, including the new fusion restaurant opening next month in the Arts District. We've been looking for something unique, something that would set us apart. He paused, letting his words sink in. What my husband is trying to say, his wife interjected with a warm smile, is that we might have an interesting proposition for you. Maya's heart began to race as Mr. Patel laid out his offer. A full scholarship to the Culinary Institute. A part-time position at his new restaurant where she could both cook and play piano. Medical insurance that would cover her mother's treatments. It sounded too good to be true. But why? Maya asked, her voice barely a whisper. You don't even know me. The elderly gentleman from the symphony board, who had stayed behind, spoke up. Sometimes talent speaks louder than words, my dear. What we heard tonight wasn't just skilled playing. It was passion, dedication, and soul. Those qualities are rare in any field. The woman in the red dress, who had also lingered, nodded in agreement. And think what you could create, combining your love of music and food. It's brilliant marketing, really. She had already offered Maya a regular weekend slot at her jazz club. Mr. Patel held up his phone, showing Maya the video that the young man had live-streamed earlier. The comments section was flooding with reactions. Amazing. Who is she? This is what real talent looks like. The view count was climbing by the minute. The world works in mysterious ways, Mr. Patel said softly. Sometimes we think we're on one path, only to discover it was leading us somewhere else entirely. Your mother's illness was a setback, yes, but it led you here, to this moment. Maya thought about her mother, imagining her reaction to this news. For 2 years, she had watched her daughter put her dreams on hold, unable to help. Now, those dreams weren't just coming back to life. They were transforming into something even more beautiful. Mr. Wong finally abandoned his pretense with the flowers and joined them. You'll still visit us, right? He asked, trying to sound casual, but his eyes were suspiciously bright. Our customers will miss your humming while you serve their tea. Maya felt tears welling up in her eyes, but these were different from the tears she shed over hospital bills and abandoned dreams. These were tears of hope, of possibility, of doors opening instead of closing. There's just one condition, Mr. Patel said, his expression turning serious. Everyone tensed slightly. You must play at our restaurant's grand opening next month. And this time, he smiled, not in a waitress uniform. The small group laughed, and Maya felt the last weight lift from her shoulders. As she looked around at these people who had started the evening as strangers and ended it as supporters, she realized that sometimes life's greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. 3 years had passed since that life-changing night at the Golden Dragon restaurant. Maya stood in the kitchen of her own establishment. Melodies and flavors, watching the busy dinner service through the pass-through window. The restaurant hummed with the perfect combination of cheerful conversation, gentle piano music, and the sizzle of pans. The grand piano in the dining room was currently being played by one of her students. A young waitress, she discovered humming classical music while busying tables. Maya smiled at the symmetry of it all. Life had a way of coming full circle. Table 12 says the fusion curry is even better than last week, her sous chef called out, grinning as he plated another order. They want to know your secret. Maya laughed as she put the finishing touches on a dessert. Tell them it's all in the timing, just like music. She had discovered that cooking and music shared a common language, rhythm, harmony, and the art of knowing when to be bold and when to be subtle. The evening light filtered through the stained glass windows she'd installed, each panel depicting a different musical instrument. The warm glow fell across the faces of her diners, including her mother, who sat at her usual corner table. Thanks to the medical insurance that came with Mr. Patel's offer 3 years ago, her mother had made a full recovery and now spent most evenings at the restaurant, proudly watching her daughter's dreams unfold. Mr. Wong was there too, retired now, but still offering advice about restaurant management, whether anyone asked for it or not. He became something of an unofficial grandfather to the staff, telling anyone who would listen about the night he discovered Maya's talent. The woman in the red dress, now a close friend and regular customer, sat at the bar, entertaining her guests with the story of how she'd nearly missed discovering the restaurant's unique charm because of her own prejudices. I almost walked out that night, she would say, shaking her head at her past self. Can you imagine? Maya checked her watch. It was almost time. She nodded to her sous chef to take over and walked through the dining room, stopping to greet familiar faces along the way. Many of her regular customers had been there since the beginning, watching her restaurant evolve from a risky concept into one of the city's most beloved dining spots. As she approached the piano, her student gracefully finished her piece and stood up, giving Maya a warm hug before stepping aside. The dining room quieted in anticipation. Everyone knew what was coming. Every evening, at exactly 8 p.m., Maya would take her place at the piano and play while desserts were served. But tonight was special. It was exactly 3 years since the night at Golden Dragon, and she had composed something new. As she sat down at the piano, she caught her mother's eye. The older woman smiled and nodded, remembering all the struggles and tears that had led to this moment. Her fingers found the keys, and the first notes of her composition filled the room. She had named it Full Circle, a piece that wove together classical techniques with contemporary rhythms, just like her cooking style blended different culinary traditions. The music told her story, the hardship, the unexpected opportunity, the joy of creating something unique. Mr. Patel, seated with a group of business associates, beamed with pride. His investment in Maya's dream had paid off better than he could have imagined. The restaurant had become famous not just for its innovative food, but for its commitment to nurturing new talent. They had a scholarship program now, helping other struggling artists and chefs pursue their dreams. As the final notes of her composition faded away, Maya looked around at the life she had built. The walls were lined with reviews and awards, including last month's Most Innovative Restaurant Concept, from the very food critics who had once dismissed the idea of combining a piano bar with fusion cuisine. But more meaningful than any award were the faces she saw every day. Her healthy mother, her dedicated staff, the customers who had become friends, and the young talents she was now able to help, just as others had helped her. Her journey had taught her that success wasn't just about talent or opportunity, but about the courage to be yourself when the world expects something else. As the applause died down and she returned to the kitchen, a young server stopped her. "Chef, I've been meaning to tell you. I actually play the violin." The hope in the girl's eyes reminded Maya of herself 3 years ago. She smiled and gestured for the girl to continue, knowing that another story was about to begin.